Hello, this video is Molecules 1. So set up your Cornell notes for Molecules 1. You can open up your notebook and enter a new listing. Some of the essential vocabulary that we will be going over are the words macromolecule, organic, inorganic, monomer, polymer, amino acid, protein, simple sugar, and carbohydrate. Feel free to write down additional information that you see in this video. So first things, I'm sure you've heard of these words, but we got to differentiate between an atom and a molecule. So when you say an atom, that means things like carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, gold, silver, lead, neon, potassium, lots. There's a whole periodic table of elements. But when we're talking about molecules, molecules are when you have more than one atom chemically bonded to each other. So examples would be carbon dioxide or CO2. These are the ones you really need to know in this class. Glucose, C6H12O6. We have water, which is H2O, and methane, which is CH4. Now, you don't have to know the structure. That's something you do in chemistry. You don't do it in living environment. But how to tell if something is organic? Well, first of all, it needs to have carbon and hydrogen. So carbon and hydrogen must be present. We don't care about oxygen. So carbon dioxide has carbon and oxygen. So that makes it inorganic. Glucose has carbon and hydrogen bonded together. It is organic. Water has oxygen and hydrogen. That's inorganic. And finally, methane, CH4, has carbon and hydrogen only. It's organic. Now, macromolecule is another term that you will see. And when you see the word macro, if you look at your root word list, you'll notice the word macro means... Yes, it means large. A large molecule. Some of the macromolecules we'll be talking about are glucose and amino acids. Now we have monomers and polymers. So look at your root word list. What does mono mean? Yes, it means one. And what does poly mean? Yes, poly means many. Now, look at the second part of this word. What does mer mean? You're right, it means part. So monomers have one part and polymers have many parts. So monomers are considered building blocks. And I'm simplifying it by showing you little shapes. You know, sometimes on the Regents you'll see squares, circles, triangles to represent particular building blocks. And when you put them together, you'll get a complex molecule or a polymer. Notice we have many parts. Now, it doesn't always have to be different ones. It can be all a bunch of squares. It could be all a bunch of circles. But the thing is, if I took away this triangle right here and I swapped it out with the square, that's actually a different molecule entirely. So keep that in mind. When you change some of the components, some of the building blocks, you're changing the entire identity of the larger molecule. Okay, so another example, when you see a building block, you can think of like a Lego brick. So the building block would be like one Lego. You put it together, you get a polymer. And you can put it together and you can put these polymers together and get an even larger polymer, a very complex molecule. So let's look at some real life examples. So one, we have simple sugars. Simple sugar, the most common simple sugar is glucose. And glucose, remember, C6H12O6. Well, when we put a bunch of glucoses together, you get a carbohydrate. And this carbohydrate in particular is starch. Now, starch is many, it's like hundreds of glucoses long. So it's not as simple as this, but it's more complicated. But when you put a bunch of a bunch of starches together, you're going to get something called cellulose. And cellulose is what is found in trees, in the trunks and the wood of trees, and it's very strong material. So cellulose is much stronger because it has many more parts. So another example, when you have an amino acid, that is an example of a monomer. Put a bunch of amino acids together, you get a protein. Now, what I would like you to do is you're going to set up a table like this in your notes, and we are going to identify there are 4 macromolecules that we will use in life science or biology. So we have 4 columns: monomer, polymer, function, example. So the first monomer is a simple sugar. And the polymer that is made from that simple sugar would be a carbohydrate. The function of these are for energy sources. And examples would be glucose. Remember, glucose is a simple sugar and starch is a carbohydrate. You might want to make note of that because you might not remember it if you just write it down. The next one is amino acid is a monomer, and a protein is the polymer that is made from that monomer. The function of proteins are for cell structures. Anything that's inside the cell that makes up the cell is made of proteins. And examples, we have hormones, we have enzymes. There's lots of different types of proteins. Another example of a monomer is a nucleotide. The last two are not as important. I don't know if you're really going to have to remember the words. But you might have to remember, you might be more familiar with these later on in the course. The polymer that's made from nucleotides is a nucleic acid. And the function is for genetic information. And that is found in our DNA and our RNA. And finally, the last one, we have fatty acids. Fatty acids are the monomers that make up lipids. And lipids, just a fancy way of saying fat. It is for energy storage because this fat can be broken down. It can be broken down and you can obtain glucose from it, which we will learn about later on in this course. And an example are oils and fats. So I just gave you a bunch of information. The one last thing I want you to put down is an example of a monomer, which is a literal, you can put one shape, and a polymer, you can connect a bunch of those shapes. Okay? I hope that this was informative for you. You're going to respond to the check for understanding so we can ensure that you understand the material that is presented to you. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this video. See you soon.